and I didn't know this at the time, but Todd went to Phil's on the closing night in 2007, and I saw him there, but I didn't know who he was. I mean, Raising Cane's, I didn't know he was this, had however many locations at that time. I wasn't, didn't realize who I was sitting in front of, and he actually forgot his wallet. And so it's like, no problem, man, we're closing, but we'll cover your tab. He was so embarrassed and really felt horrible. And my dad, being the guy my dad is, like, don't worry about it, Todd, it's all good. And Todd, that meant something to Todd though, because I thought it was really cool. He loaned us the money to start the new restaurant.
We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. B1 Bank knows that entrepreneurs like you are always thinking one step ahead. So you need banking solutions that can keep up. It begins with lending. Does your business need working capital or financing for new equipment? How about a real estate or a construction loan? Good news, the B1 lending team is ready to learn your goals and help you find the best lending option available. Now let's talk about uncomplicating your daily cash flow. B1 offers a full array of treasury management services that let you collect funds faster, pay funds more efficiently, and access your information with powerful online tools. Most importantly, B1 understands the value of working with local nonprofits to build a stronger community. They believe in giving back through hands-on involvement with their B1 Community Outreach Program because it's simply the right thing to do. B1 Bank. Be uncomplicated. To learn more, visit b1bank.com. Equal housing lender, member FDIC. Hello, I'm Andrew McClendon, your host of the Next Entrepreneur Podcast. We're here today in the Propel Production Podcast Studio in Baton Rouge, and we welcome our guest, Mr. Jordan Piazza, owner of ReBirth Brands, the owners of Uncle Earl's and the Caterie, and something new to come. Right? So welcome to the podcast, Jordan. You're a restaurateur like your father, second generation, right?
Yes, indeed.
Your father was Gus Piazza. So I thought we would start there, where you told us about your dad. He was a prolific restaurateur in Baton Rouge and built an iconic brand in a Louisiana institution. So how did your dad get into business?
He was a football manager for the football team, and obviously that doesn't pay anything. So he just made a lot of connections over that time, and went to work for the gentleman that owned it, Phil Tumanella. And at some point, he sold a portion of the business to my dad and another guy, Jim Delafleur, who owned K-Arts here in town. And over the next few years, I think my dad grew very fond of it and knew he was a natural fit and just loved it and fed off of it and felt it was his path forward. So he ended up buying the other guys out and grew it from there.
So he bought it in 75, I believe I remember reading. And
it opened in 50, so it was already a 25-year run before he bought it.
Yeah, it's amazing. So we used to go there 35, 40 years ago, and it was a great place. We really loved it.
The original one is, it was such a hole in the wall, but it really was. I mean, it was just nothing like it. I mean, just so authentic and genuine and ugly and all of it, but it worked and everyone loved it. And that's where some of the greatest memories I had growing up. And I love going around town and hearing people tell stories of every Friday night they ate there, or, whatever their family's tradition was, if they were in for the holidays. And it's just amazing that it had such an impact in the community. Obviously it was my life, but to see everyone else that also had, a love for it was really cool.
So he owned it for 32 years, right? I think he closed it on the anniversary date, right?
Yeah, in fact, I was a freshman or just graduated high school, going into my freshman year of college, and that's when he decided business was kind of slow. We had moved from Government Street to college, and I just had that conversation. Education was very important to him, and he told me, you have to do school. And I was like, well, I can't do school and be the general manager of the restaurant and both do well. I mean, they might survive, but neither are going to do really well. And education was very important to him, and he wanted to make sure I had that checked off. And so he decided we were going to close. And I forget how it came about, but I was talking with him and figured out that the date was June 2nd. And I was like, well, let's close it to the mark, so that, because I wanted him to get that mark, but I didn't want to go too far past it. Yeah, because July is always the slowest month in the restaurant industry. So it was 32 years to the day.
So you were young, growing up in the business. What was that like, being part of a Louisiana institution? Were you aware of it at all?
Definitely not.
It was just life, right?
It was life, and I thought it was normal, and I always never understood why other people would saw me as a character too, because they were like this little kids running around doing things, and it's all I knew for me. And I'd go to school, I'd come home, go straight there, and I thought that was normal. I was telling my friends all the time, like, I spent the weekends at the restaurant working and never had to be asked. My dad had never said, son, I need you or I want you. It was just, I loved it. I loved being around people, and I feel that I'm more of an older soul than my time. And so I think that's part of what attracted me to be there, was being around older people, and I just enjoyed having adult conversations for whatever reason. But I had no idea the impact that it had on people, or how important the place was to so many people, or the people that were coming in and out. Shaq would come there, and I was so young. Obviously, I knew Shaq was an NBA star, but I never realized what all he had accomplished. I was just thought he was a good basketball player, but I was really young, and Dr. Copping, who was the president at LSU, he and my dad were very close friends, and he was eating there every day. And I just never understood until I got older the magnitude of the people that were coming in and out of there. It was just incredible. And I don't think that exists today anywhere. And I don't think, I think it only exists in an era when there's not cell phones and all that, when you had to meet face to face, right? Yeah. And a lot of business. I mean, there's always jokes on different talk shows and all that the deal gets done in the back room, and it was so true. I mean, there were a lot of deals that were done in the back room of the original Phil's, and it's incredible. Yeah,
a lot of friends he made over the years there.
I knew the impact he had on me, but never knew the impact he had on something. I mean, his funeral, there was a line wrapped around Ravenhorst for 2 hours. I mean, it was incredible, the amount of people he befriended over the years.
Yes, so I remember there were a couple other restaurants that he had. So he closed the old Phil's, and then he opened Phil's on Concord, right?
All College Drive, yes, sir.
And I'm trying to remember what that was before.
It was it was Ruby's at one point, and then it was Cipriani's right before that. Cipriani's Italian, with Don and Meg Gerald.
That's right, yeah. And then Phil's Oyster Bar there, right?
And now it's Thai Kitchen.
Thai Kitchen. But there was another restaurant that he had. It was where the Ruffino's is now.
Gus's Seafood Restaurant.
Gus's. And he had that simultaneously?
He did for a period. He had he'd opened another restaurant, and I think he was a little ahead of time. He knew that he had friends living in CCL, so he knew that people were out there, but it wasn't the volume of people that live there today, or the massive people. And
that's a big restaurant.
Huge, way bigger than Phil's.
Right.
And it was a little more upscale than Phil's. But it wasn't an oyster bar, but it was a seafood restaurant. And I think he was just a few years early, and TJ Moran came in after and bought it from him, and it turned at DiNardo's, and then now Ruffino's, and Ruffino's is celebrating 25 years this year.
Oh, my goodness.
It's crazy. Yeah.
So I remember being there at Gus's Seafood, and these doors open to a back room, double doors, and out walks Gus with two other guys kind of behind him, and he looked like he was just on top of the world, and he looked like he was 7'6" tall,
Yeah.
He was a short fellow, but
5'8".
5'8", but I have that vision of him in my mind, but that was back in the day.
Yeah, I wish I could have been there to see that.
So how old were you when he passed?
I was 18.
He was 18. So he closed a restaurant on the same year that he died?
He did. And obviously not related, but he had lost his, he was diabetic, so he had fought that disease for years.
Yeah.
And so the early year 2000, he had a kidney transplant. My mom was the donor. And
wow.
And I was so young, I was in 6th grade at the time. I had no idea that magnitude either. And I'll never forget, I did poorly on a test, and a teacher came in, and she's like, I know what you're going through, so instead of failing you, I'm just going to give you a D. And I was like, okay, thank you. And I'm like, what is she talking about? Yeah. And then I realized that both of my parents were undergoing surgery in Birmingham, and it might not go well for either of them, right? And so it was kind of eye opening once that happened to realize that, man, because my aunts were in town, different people come to stay with us, but I never knew what was really going on. And so
my goodness.
he had a kidney transplant. Both of his parents were diabetic, as well as his sister. So in the Italian blood, and obviously he didn't eat healthy at the restaurant because he had such good food in front of him at all times. And then he dealt with that in early 2000, and then he in 2006 cut his foot, and diabetics get poor circulation to the feet, and so he didn't tell my mom because he was very hard-headed. He's very old school tough, put some Neosporin, it'll heal. Well, it didn't heal because it didn't get the blood it needed, and so they ended up having to amputate his leg in 2006, and actually the week of my graduation. And then fast forward a year, and he was his health wasn't getting any better, and he was very depressed after losing his leg because he was a very independent man, and he hated to have to rely on anybody for anything. And I think it kind of like took his soul. And then the restaurant wasn't doing too well, and he closed in June. And then 5 months later, in November, a friend called him one morning and asked him where they were going to lunch, because that's what my dad was known for, hosting the lunches and at the restaurant. And so when it closed, his friends, of 20, 30 people every day are used to coming to lunch there. So they were just now finding new places to go. And he was kind of the center of attention, if you will, in terms of or the glue that kept everybody together.
Oh, wow.
And so the friend called that morning and said, "Where are we going?" He said, "I don't know. I'll call you back," and turned over and had a heart attack. And
oh, my goodness.
My mom didn't know at the time, obviously. And that was it.
Oh, my goodness. So you're graduated from high school at that time?
Just graduated.
U-High, right? Yeah. So you went to LSU?
First, I went to the community college, Baton Rouge, for a year, and then I transferred to LSU.
I see. And so what did your father's passing, what impact did that have on your family? I mean, it must have been pretty dramatic.
It was, it was unexpected. We knew he was, obviously sick over the years, but he was the true patriarch, right? And just, it's such a, major impact on all of our lives, and just, we all loved him in different ways. Obviously, each of us had our own special bond with him. And for me, personally, it was very difficult because I was young. I'm the youngest of the bunch. I have a twin sister, so we were 18, and it was kind of the first real loss, substantial loss in our lives. Obviously, you lose grandparents, but that's expected. Right. But for a father, so young, it really opened my eyes personally to appreciate relationships and not take them for granted, because what's here today might not be here tomorrow. And it really kind of put things in perspective for me.
So what do you remember lessons that your father taught you about business?
Whew. The biggest thing that I always gathered from him was just he was very hands-on, very people, customer service oriented. He's buried in the Garden of Valor at Green Oaks, which is dedicated to those who serve. And even though he wasn't a uniform guy, he was here to serve people. Yeah. And there was many people after he passed away that I'd run into that I never met, and they were like, tell me stories, just these great stories. But the common theme was like, he was the guy that would give you his shirt off of his back, and you just met him and you don't know why, but he would do that. And so he was always taught, what I learned from him was to treat people with respect, work hard, stay humble, because he had all these great friends, right? And these playing tennis at the governor's mansion when Edwin Edwards was there, that's not normal, right? And so I didn't know that existed. I didn't think the governor had time to play tennis, but he did. And so, but you never knew that. And all the friends he had and the powers that were in control, he could have been a different guy, and he wasn't. He was just the same old Gus Piazza, and he stayed grounded from where he came because he grew up in Metairie in a not wealthy family, and so not successful, working for other people, his parents. And so this was his first business, and he included his family, which is a lesson I learned, to include those that want to be included, and I think it's very special. Family was everything to him, and that's one thing we've taken away is that, family is the most important thing in your life.
And so how many siblings do you have? I
have one brother and 3 sisters.
Oh, wow.
There's 5 of us, yeah. And so my brother's the oldest. He's 9 years older than my sister and my twin and I that are.
So after community college, you went to LSU,
I did.
You said, and you worked in restaurants during college?
I did. I managed a bar in Tigerland first, which was a great experience. And then I went to work for the guys that owned Lasting Concepts, which is a management company for Walk-Ons, Happy's, Brew House, and Schlitts Giggles, which was Jack Warner and Brandon Landry.
Right. And you did that through college?
I did. All the way through college, yeah. I finished college in 2011, and I worked with Schlitts Giggles primarily originally, the pizza restaurant, and they had 2 locations, and so I started at the one on Perkins and then transferred to the one downtown, and then later transferred to the corporate office to help Jack and Brandon personally with some things.
Oh, cool. And then after graduation, what'd you do?
I worked for a short stint at Heck Industries, which is a concrete company, just a good family friend I've known forever and looked up to. Until I figured things out, and then I went to work for Todd Graves at Raising Cane's, and I spent 6 months in the restaurants, which was the best education I've ever gotten. Just learning, how they do what they do and why they do it, and it's so impressive. And then after that, I went to work for Todd personally in his office.
And what did you do for him then?
I was the business manager for him, so business manager for the founder and CEO, and I handled his active community involvement budget. So he had a budget allocated for the community, and it was about $500,000 a year, and so I would manage how that would be spent in the community and kind of those relationships for him. I would handle his political and civic affairs, which was nothing I ever did before, but I enjoyed it. It was very interesting, which obviously later on led to some political inspirations for me. And then I'd handle his entertainment, which would be, like LSU football, baseball, suites, and different tickets he had, and just how that was spent.
My goodness.
And then he had a nonprofit organization that he started with John George's called Lemonade Day. And I was the executive director of that nonprofit for 3 or 4 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which was a really cool program. It taught kids how to start their own business and how to save.
Yeah.
And so
I didn't really realize he did that with John George's.
Yeah, he sure did. They started together, and they were running it together every year for the first few years. And then when I kind of got in there and was working for Todd directly, I think Todd kind of took the bull by the horns, really, and kind of put it under the Cane's wing. But they did start it together.
Oh, that's fantastic. So how long did you work for Todd?
4 years.
Oh, wow. So you saw a lot of good stuff over there, how to run a good business, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
So how did you transition into you restarting with your brother, Phil's?
So my brother, I always knew one day that I wanted to open Phil's again to honor my dad. And so Todd asked me back in 2015 one day. We were starting to get to know one another, and he'd asked me. I'll never forget. I was riding with him somewhere, and he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I want to open Phil's, but I don't want to do it necessarily to make money. I want to do it to honor my dad. So it's kind of a side business, and I want to figure out what else I want to do in my life, And if it's just Phil's, great. But if it's not, that's okay as well. I just really wanted to open it to honor. I didn't like how my dad's legacy was remembered. He had 32 years, and then he closed, and then he passed away shortly thereafter. And so I wanted people to have the good, fond memories, and I thought that it was kind of missing. And you see in the Business Report or 225, it'd be like those gone but not forgotten businesses, and over the years, and Phil's would often be mentioned. And so I knew that there were a lot of people, especially my age, who grew up going there that wanted to experience that with their families and didn't have that chance. And so fast forward a few years later, I'm working for Todd, and my brother calls me one day, and he's like, Donnie Jarrow had just called him and said, "Hey, I got a space, are you interested?" And my brother was working at Heck Industries. He'd worked there for many years as a salesman, and he was, asked him, "Do you have any interest in the restaurant business?" So he called me, and I was actually ironically standing next to Todd, who, was hard to get to Todd, at this time. And I said, "What do you think?" And so he's like, "Oh, well, call Robert, who's his CPA." And we just kind of started the communication. And then the 4 of us together kind of built a business plan together. And my brother and I went to work on it, and it was happening right after. It kind of happened really quickly and unexpectedly.
Goodness. So Donnie called y'all. Y'all weren't in the restaurant business. Did he know that you wanted to?
I think he knew that there was a part of missing from my brother and I, because my brother's, in my opinion, relationship with the businesses was different than mine. I mean, we're 9 years apart. We had our dad at a different point in life, right? My dad was a lot harder on my brother than he was me, which was obviously, my brother would get angry at times. He always tells a story that every Saturday my dad would wake him up like at 6 a.m. to go clean the pool at our house. And so he couldn't wait till he graduated and moved out because he wanted to see me cleaning the pool. And he came back the next Saturday, and I was still sleeping, and he's asking my dad, he's like, "What's going on?" And my dad had hired a new pool guy to do it. And so he was mad at me, and I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about, man. Like, I didn't ask him to do that. And so I think my brother's relationship with my dad in the restaurant was different than mine. And he loved, I think he saw the back room and really could appreciate it. and understand what was going on back there and how cool and the dynamic was. And so I think he wanted to bring that back, and he was capable of doing that. I don't think I could have done that because I can't sit still. And so, but I loved the people and the being out front and talking to everybody and, kind of being the face of it. And so it worked out really great. And I don't know if Donnie specifically knew, but I think he probably could sense that, like, if the opportunity presented itself, knowing that I was working in the restaurant industry since, college with the Walk-Ons guys and then Todd, it was in my blood. It wasn't going anywhere.
So there's a point where you've got to sign a lease, but then you have to come up with a business plan, get a building designed, built, kitchen equipment installed, a menu developed, tested out, soft opening. How did that timeline work for you guys?
It actually, I'm going through this now with the new restaurant we're doing. I'm having to redo all this again, but Phil's was way easier because we literally just took the menu from when we closed and used it. I mean, we might have made a few adjustments, but it's very minimal, intentionally, right? We were trying to go back to how the original Phil's looked and trying to bring that back because we felt that got lost whenever my dad moved from government to college. He changed the design and it just didn't feel like Phil's. And so that was something my brother and I worked really hard to make sure that we brought elements in that, which I called inexpensive things because those materials are inexpensive that were used back in the 80s. And so, we had the wood grain walls that you see in those that everyone hates, but we intentionally designed it that way. So the process took about, I believe a year. And Todd and Robert were investors in the deal that kind of helped us, do the whole thing. And it was really cool. And I didn't know this at the time, but Todd went to Phil's on the closing night in 2007. And I saw him there, but I didn't know who he was. I mean, Raising Cane's, I didn't know he was this, had however many locations at that time. I wasn't, didn't realize who I was sitting in front of. And he actually forgot his wallet. And so it's like, no problem, man. We're closing, but we'll cover your tab. He was so embarrassed and really felt horrible. And my dad, being the guy my dad is, like, don't worry about it, Todd. It's all good. And Todd, that meant something to Todd though, because I thought it was really cool. He loaned us the money to start the new restaurant. So it's kind of like he brought it back. And so
that's unbelievable.
It really is. And it's, and I didn't realize, Todd's really, he loves the nostalgia of authentic places, and he knew my dad. And so he went on the last night intentionally. And so I think everything, he loves being able to kind of appreciate those businesses. And so, the fact that, he was there the last night, I didn't know who he was. I went to work for him. And then he tells me the story years later, I didn't even pay him the last night. I felt so bad. Y'all were going out of business. And then here he is to be able to help bring us back. I just thought was awesome.
That is unbelievable. What a great story. Okay. So in reopening Phil's, it's your first time in business, right? For yourself.
Right.
And you got some financial backing, but there's a lot goes into that. What were some of the big challenges in getting your business open?
That time it was, it was new business for me and for my brother. Obviously, he was working for Heck Industries, as I stated, and so he was getting out of that as well. And so there were challenges of working together, having partnerships and working with family. I mean, he and I had never worked together before, and so that presents its own challenges, right? You have difference of opinions, you got partnerships. But then, like you said, there's all the things we have to think about, like what furniture are we going to buy, what plateware are we going to use, who's going to help us, run the kitchen and all that. And it's a lot, back then my dad had that figured out because he had his mom and dad in the kitchen, or his mom really helping, and then his sister.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, Margaret was always there, and she was the mean short lady at the front, and I loved her to death, but she was no nonsense, and so she would curse at you, and she was running the cash register, but she was also the cook, and she was a phenomenal cook. And so for him, he kind of had all that figured out over those years. But for us, we're like, man, we've got some great ideas, but we need someone to execute it. And so we had to, track that person down, and we found a guy named Alf who's still there. And he was with Rufino's for many years.
Oh, wow.
And he came to work for us. And then we found Miss Pam, who just celebrated yesterday her 40 years with Phil's.
Wow.
Which is incredible, which is longer than I've been alive, right? So, longer than her, she was just had her first child. 6 months later, she started working for my dad, and so she'd literally been there through it all. And celebrating 40 years is incredible. So it was important to us. We went and got her. We went and got some of the kitchen employees that were still around, the oyster shucker. I mean, we really went and got some key people that could help bring back that legacy.
Wow, that's fantastic. So you use your dad's old menu, you said, right?
Absolutely,
That's
yeah.
cool. Y'all did a really nice job on that restaurant. Like, I really enjoy going there.
Thank you.
It feels good, and it feels like there should be more of them. Like, it feels like a reproducible model. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm kind of a growth guy.
Yeah.
You know, I'm like, man, we got to do more of these things.
I agree with you, and I don't think that was ever the intent, because for us it was, again, recreating a place that my dad was at, and so there was only one. You can only be one place at one time. So for us, it was never really the intent to grow it. But I definitely think that it's gone a long way, and my brother should. My brother and I parted ways in 2019 in business wise, and so he stayed with 2020. Right. He stayed with Phil's. I went to Earl's, and I know he's been approached about some different things, and I hopefully that works out if that's what he wants to do.
Yeah, yeah.
We worked with Chris Ferrari of CSRS, who became a good friend of mine when I was at Canes, and he was a principal over there at the time, and he's just been around the world and seen a lot of things. And I don't know that he ever went to Phil's originally, but I kind of described it to him and told him, and he was really instrumental in helping design that and make sure that we use the right materials. I mean, little details like behind the bar, he can draw a lot of things, right? And it's like, well, they can build it, but it's going to cost. And I remember one of the things he built was in the back bar, there's two cabinets, one on the far left and one on the far right. And in the rendering that he drew, it had oyster shells. And so I'm like, well, man, like, are we going to print this on paper, like some type of, sticker or something? Like, how are we doing this? And he said, no, we're going to build it. And so he went and built the box, and then I had to go get a whole bunch of oyster shells from the guy that we were eventually going to buy all of our oysters from, but we used to buy from back in the day, and clean them and then fit them all in there. And I mean, it was an incredible process, but they're beautiful doors now.
Oh, wow.
And so he was really instrumental in making sure we kept it simplistic and, again, bringing that authentic but homey vibe, if you will, comfortable, like you said. And I think sometimes, my biggest fear was overdoing it. You can overdo it and really lose the.
It's got a great feel, man.
Thank you.
Really, really good. So, they always say the hardest part of running a restaurant is like, you got to be there. Like, you can't ever turn your back on it. You can't go on vacation. What would you say is the hardest part of running a restaurant?
I would say there's definitely a lot of truth to that. I think times have changed. I think when my dad was, in that era, that was definitely more true than it is today. And I say that because you see people like Todd, who's got 700 restaurants, right. and he doesn't have. He's not at every restaurant. You can't be. And so for me personally, it was important to not let the restaurant hold me hostage, and because I saw it do it to my dad, right? He wouldn't come on vacation because of that, and if he wasn't there, they weren't busy, and that's our bread and butter, and is making sure there's sales. And so for me, I think the hardest part was just managing guest expectations and making sure that that everyone's experience was great, and that we had a management staff that understood what we were trying to deliver, which does include my brother and I, right? Because that's part of the deal. People are coming to see us, and so we had to be there. But I was very key on making sure that the success of the business was not solely on us being there, because that's not what any of us envisioned. And family was important to us. As I said, when my dad died, it really kind of brought to light that, hey, time is sacred, so we really need to be spending it with our loved ones. And my brother had a young son at that time, and now I have two young kids now, third on the way. And so I think for me it's just and my brother was making sure that that didn't happen. And there's definitely it happened originally, because when you're open and you have so many fires that you're putting out that you didn't expect, and people aren't working out, and so that's definitely difficult. But the labor force is the most challenging part, in my opinion. And I mean, look, if people want to steal, they're going to steal, right? It's just putting the processes in place and the systems in place to prevent it and deter it. And I learned a lot of that at Canes. There's a lot of the great things I learned at Canes that I was able to bring, that my brother would sometimes be like, well, why are we doing that? It seems a little excessive. And it's like, well, I've seen it work very well. And some of the policies are excessive, right? But there's a reason that they're doing them at a place like Canes, and it did prevent a lot of those things from happening, right? Being extra security measures and things that you don't really expect with a mom and pop type shop, right? You expect, oh no, the rules will be lax, and it's like, no, we were real fanatical about a lot of things we did, and designed everything intentionally, and had systems and processes in place to prevent theft and keep people from doing those type of things. But I just learned that you can't worry about the things you can't control, right? Yeah. So I didn't worry about that.
So once you got it opened, you accomplished your goal of having a place that people could remember your father by. And how did that feel to you and your brother?
It was great. I know for me personally, it was such an honorable experience to see, especially see his friends. They're all 14 years older at this point. And so it's been a long time since we've seen them. We haven't seen them regularly. We're obviously dealing with the errors on food, right? Because they haven't had it in a while, so they can't remember if it tastes the same or not. And so it's just that group of people that sit in the back room who are the loyal ones were always the most difficult ones to please, because they had everything they wanted a special way. But my dad did that for them. Miss Pam did that for them for so long, so we had to kind of continue that tradition. And for me personally, it felt great. I got a portrait of my dad that hangs in the restaurant now. That a friend of mine, Jacob Zumo, he's a local artist here in town. I got him to paint it, and it came out incredible. I gave him some photos of my dad back in the 80s when he was or 90s. He's wearing a maroon polo, and he did a commercial for Louisiana companies where he was, talking about how great they were, right? And I'll never forget, he says in there, he's like, they understand my wants, they understand my needs. And it's like, well, it's an insurance company. Like, there's nothing you really want from them other than you have to have it. And it was just funny to me. But he took that photo and drew a great portrait, and we hung it. And so it kind of centered right by the bar. And so everyone sees it. And I think it's it's really remarkable. And I laugh because people see it. Some people the customers that come in, obviously, that don't know the original Phils, and they're like, man, why do you have a portrait of yourself up there? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I said, oh, that's my dad. And I had to explain the story to them. They didn't know it, but we have some resemblance, at that age when he was healthy.
At some point after you got Phil's open, you start spreading your wings and look at another opportunity in Uncle Earl's. How did that come about?
So the guys that had owned Earl's at the time, Brian Ott and Zach Love, they were friends of my brother. And I obviously knew them from going out, but they were older than me, so they were good friends of my brother. And Brian Lanois, who's one of my brother's good friends and now my current business partner. And they approached him about, about needing a loan or something. And my brother said, well, what do you think? I was like, man, it's a no-brainer. Like, I was going out there all the time. I was like, it's right down the street. We can create some synergy. It's a late night place, but then there's events. We can cater it from Phil's. Like, there's a lot of positive from that. And so we kind of worked through the numbers and figured out how that would go. And we went full force in it. We bought it in January of 2019 and completely renovated it and opened it in time for St. Patrick's Day, which was 3 months later, which was typical Jordan fashion, is, last minute chaos, but that's where I thrive the best. And I mean, we did a complete full on renovation of the place, and it looks incredible. To this day, people come in and are just like blown away that it looks that nice because they don't expect it because of how it used to look. Yeah.
So you had 2 of the 3 partners exited?
Yes. So my brother exited in 2020, and then David Lanois, who's Brian's brother, he was in it originally.
But when y'all first bought it from the 3 guys, 2 of those left?
Oh, yes. They left. Yes.
Yeah. And so is you, your brother,
Brian Lanois, and his brother David Lanois.
So it was 4 of y'all.
It's 4 of us, yeah.
And then over time, you bought them out? Or?
Yeah. So David and Brian were never intended to run the bar. They just were investors. And my brother and I obviously expected that I was going to run the bar. And we had a buddy of mine, Jordan Elder, who we brought in, had one of my best friends. He'd worked with me at Walk-Ons back in the day. He came to Cane's, worked at Cane's, and we brought him in, and we're going to bring him on as a partner to run the bar. And he did that for 2 years, and then COVID struck out and kind of things went chaotic. But at that same time that he exited, my brother exited when I exited Phil's, and then David exited as well. Just thought it was a good time for him to get out. He thought it was a good time for him to get out, so he parted, and his brother bought his shares out. So which really needed to happen, because the more partners you have, it can be very, very complicated.
Well, yeah. Too many bosses, but there's, you start to spread the spoils at the end of the year, and there's too many hands out. Right?
Absolutely.
So, I look at some real estate deals that some guys do, and they end up having so many people involved. I'm like, yes, it dilutes risk, but how do you
dilutes reward too?
Yeah, it dilutes reward. Yeah. Exactly.
Especially on things that you're pretty sure that are going to be successful. Yeah. Earl's was uber successful, immediately because it always it'd been around, and that was kind of one of the intriguing things. We weren't starting a new business; it was one that was already established, already had a reputation. It just needed better management, and so and a better vibe. And so, in bringing that, we were able to be successful very quickly.
What is Earlapalooza?
It's our annual. So it's it's a concert event we host after the the Wearing the Green Parade. So it's basically the parade ends at Acadian and Perkins, and we host a huge bash after the parade
at
Uncle Earl's. Yeah, in the parking lot.
And so, how does that go down? I mean, who all do you get?
So in the past, when we took over our first year, we did it. Often what happened is the previous guys that owned it, they would use a lot of local artists, whether it's Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Lafayette, but regional. And during after 2019 was we just bought it in 2019, renovated, and literally opened 1 week before, and it was a huge success. I mean, the weather was perfect, everything that needed to happen happened. I mean, the lineup was great, the music was great, and we had to have 5,000 people there, and it was incredible. And so when we were playing in 2020, which ended up getting postponed for 2 years, I was like, man, we really need to think outside the box. And so that year, the first year, we brought the Human Jukebox Band. And so and everyone was like, well, why did y'all do that? And it's like, well, man, when I found out that this parade has been around for all these years, and Southern's band, the greatest, one of the greatest bands in Baton Rouge, I mean, better than LSU for honest, but in terms of just different, right? Yeah. But I mean, they're nationally known, right? And and so the fact that they'd never been in the parade was mind blowing to me. And so I contacted the band over there and made friends with the band director and got them to march in the parade and then end at Uncle Earl's and just kind of to create some excitement about the after the parade. And it was a little logistical nightmare, but it was awesome. I mean, Pat Shingleton and his family were so thankful and excited because it wasn't free. We had to sponsor that, and but it was incredible what it did for the parade. I mean, everyone in Baton Rouge, they never get to see, a lot of people don't get to see the Southern band. They see them on TV when they're playing it, but they don't always go to the games, right? And so to have them in the parade for the first time was awesome. But that kind of made me wheels started spinning. Say, man, there's a bigger play here than just these local bands, and I love these local bands, but we're having them many times a year. And so when 2020, before it happened, I was like, we need to reach out to some bigger artists, and then we connected with Ian Vaughn, who used to be the COO of Raising Cane's, and he owned Lava Cantina, which was here in Baton Rouge, and they got one in Texas. And he does that. He does agent work and booking talent. And so we connected with him, and basically I went to Washington Mardi Gras when Todd Graves was king, and they had Flo Rida there. And so I'd heard Flo Rida he put on an incredible performance, and I just was like, man, Baton Rouge needs that. And so when I got back from that, or when we were thinking about it, I was like, man, how do we get a Flo Rida? What's that cost? I mean, obviously, we don't have pockets like Todd, but is it reasonable? Does it make business sense? And it turns out that it does. And it turns out there's a lot of those artists out there that are in that price range that are affordable given the volume we're doing, right? We know that 3,500 to 5,000 people are coming. So if that's happening, it allows you to take some better risk. And so that's kind of what started that for me. It's like, man, I want this event to be something every year that's memorable, but it's also big acts, because I feel like Baton Rouge deserves that. The River Center is finally getting some good acts, but it took a long time to get there. And so it's like, okay, we'll make less because we're going to spend more, right? But it's okay if we're doing it for the right reasons. If we're doing it to make sure to bring these artists that haven't come to Baton Rouge. So last year we brought Juvenile, we brought B.O.B., we brought the year before we brought Manny Fresh. The first year that we did this, we did Nelly, because he rode in the float with Todd Graves, so Todd helped with that one. But we had Nelly, Manny Fresh, Flo Rida, and Parish County Line. And when I tell you, it was an incredible event. It was unbelievable. Oh my goodness! I mean, and the weather's beautiful. It starts in 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It goes till 8 or 9, and it was awesome. And this past year, the weather was a little cold, ironically, and so it's the turnout wasn't as great, but it was well received. Juvenile got to come, which is a New Orleans great, and B.O.B., who's another big national artist that we brought in. So that's kind of our goal for this, to continue to grow it with these, these mainly finding these acts that might have been popular when we were younger, right? Like when our party days, that are still around and looking and don't cost an arm and a leg, right? You try and go get, Post Malone, or, you're going to spend $5 million, which we're not doing. So, we're just trying to find some cool ways to bring good talent to Baton Rouge. And a lot of times, New Orleans is more known for bringing those talent, right? And it's like, man, like, well, why can't we do the same thing? And the answer is we can if someone's willing to take the risk. And I think in a lot of ways in the past, people like taking the easy way out, which is let's spend a little bit amount of money on the artist and let's keep it local. But it's like, man, those guys are great, and I support them year round by having them at the bar. But it's outplayed. They're playing everywhere. Let's get people that no one has seen, and it truly
that is
incredible.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
thank you. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. So that's your second experience with bringing an old brand back to life. The first one being Phil's, and then second one Uncle Earl's. And so I wanted to ask you the impact of COVID on you. At this point, by the time COVID hit in March of 2020, you were out of Phil's?
I was out of Phil's, yes.
Yeah. And so you're in Earl's by yourself. But what's your understanding of how COVID impacted Earl's from firsthand experience, but also from Phil's, from your understanding?
So for Phil's, my understanding, COVID, obviously, sales were affected because in dining was limited, but the to-go increased dramatically, and I believe they got a lot of momentum off-site events, where they were creating food for offices or organizations that still had to meet, right. And then just a lot of people that were out supporting local to go, right? And so I think for Phil's, it ended up being positive.
Oh, that's good.
For Earl's, it was very difficult. I mean, we were halted. We were closed for 6 months. I mean, we did $1.5 million in 9 months in 2019 to doing $500,000 in 2020. And but we still paid rent. We still had all the expenses. We paid our people before PPP came out. We committed to paying them for 6 weeks, just with the funds that we had in the account. We got closed the day before Friday, or 2 days before our St. Patrick's Day event, which is our largest annual event. So if we could have gotten that event, it would have been, enough to sustain, some of the losses for a while. But it literally got shut down 2 days before. And we thought it would just be a couple weeks. And so at first, okay, we'll just weather the storm. And then it didn't end. And so we just continued to do right by, or we felt was right by our people and by our customers, and kind of get creative if we could. But we decided it was, they allowed you to get temporary permits for food. So we tried to do that for a little while, and it became more hassle than it was worth. So we closed whenever, for a 6-month period. But when it came back, it was strong, and they had some relief programs that were out there, and so that was obviously very, very helpful to offset those times.
Those were lifesavers.
I mean, they really were. I mean, game changing.
PPP, and
it was.
The government doesn't do a lot right, but they nailed that one from my experience with it, but also from other people that I've seen and talked to. It just was really, really important.
I agree. And the only thing I think was not great about it is that everyone didn't necessarily benefit the same. Like, for example, some grants were limited on first come, first serve, and so you hate to see your colleagues in the industry locally that didn't get to participate in that. And that's but you're absolutely right. It was very key to continuing, and especially for us, it was important that we did right. We took the money and actually used it to pay employees, right? Yeah. Some people did other things with it, and I just think when you do right by other people, it's good karma.
So at some point, you decide to start a company called ReBirth Brands. When did that happen?
So that happened, last year, 2022, or the end of 2021. I always knew that I wanted to do more. Now that I was out of Phil's, I had Uncle Earl's. I'm like, man, I really gotta, I have a family now, married, one kid and another on the way. It's like, I really got to get started in increasing, my income if I'm going to be able to survive. And I also knew that I get bored with the monotonous everyday routine of one thing. And so, we had, whenever I was at Phil's still, I had called Julie Payrow, who's a colleague of mine now, works with us at ReBirth. I called her one day and said, listen, I'm trying to describe how, my title, and I'm not one that's into, being CEO or anything like that. Yeah. So how can I describe it in a unique way? I can't say I founded Phil's because I didn't found Phil's. I mean, I found the new version of it with my brother. And so anyway, she came up with the idea, well, why don't you say the co-founder of the ReBirth of Phil's Oyster Bar? And so that was 2018, and that just kind of stuck in my head. And then when I sat back last year and thought about it, I'm like, well, we kind of did the same thing with Earl's. And now we have, this need to, we have so many events at Earl's that we needed to feed the events, right? For guests want food. And so I was trying to think of how do we capitalize on that. It's lost revenue that we could be taking internally. And when I was with Phil's, it was different, but now that I'm not and Phil's is thriving without it, they probably didn't want the hassle. And it was easier for us to have something internally, because having outside vendors come in is difficult, because they're not worried about what you have to do. And for us, when events end, we're trying to turn it over to open to the general public, and it's hundreds of people waiting outside. I mean, it's very important that everything's done right. And so it kind of came the idea, like, let's start doing our own food, and we'll just do catering. We'll cater our own events. And there's a bakery right next to us, Counter Space, that's, right behind Earl's. And they had just moved to Jefferson Highway in a new development right over there. And so I just approached her and said, hey, we'd love to split the kitchen with you. We'll take it at nights and you take it during the day, because she's going to have 2 locations. And she's like, well, why don't you just take the whole thing? And so we did. And now we decide, through talking with Julie, we're like, well, let's call it the Caterie. And then she proposed that, and I was like, it's a great idea. And it was an old name, but a new meaning. It was in this, same general vicinity, because it was in the next shopping center originally. So we thought, again, why build from the ground up on a branding standpoint when that brand already has so much notoriety. I mean, I walk around now with the Caterie shirt and people are ecstatic. And I told Julie, I'm like, we might have made a mistake, because people are getting overly excited that the bar is coming back. But we just have to divert them to let them know what it is, and it's exciting. So,
are the 2 spaces attached?
The Rebirth office is actually in between the 2. So it's Uncle Earl's, then ReBirth Brands office, and then the Caterie.
Okay.
So they're attached in the shopping center. But
yeah. So it's interesting that the Caterie and I call it Uncle Earl's was owned by the same family, the Brussos.
Yeah.
Right. So what's involved when you want to take over an old name? The company, the Caterie, was sold to another entity, then it burned and went out of business, been gone for, 10 years?
Yeah, about 10 years, yeah.
And, do you have to go back and check with the other people that owned it?
No, so legally speaking, and I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but from my understanding, is that you just, everything is registered to the Secretary of State. And so if the entity name is not reserved, then it's available. Yeah. And having seen that it's over 10 years since the last time they've renewed, it kind of just told us, hey,
it's available.
Yeah, they're not interested necessarily. Because when Phil's closed, my brother and I did reserve the name for the trademark, because at one point someone had mentioned Opie with Cajun's Cafe. They went in Phil's after we did. And before my dad died, and they were talking about after my dad died, he was talking about naming it Phil's, or someone else was talking about it, I'm sorry. And that's when I was like, no, we can't let that happen. And so it kind of brought awareness to me that we need to reserve that name. And so my brother and I reserved it. And this was 2007. So obviously then we had no intentions to open it anytime soon, but we just didn't want to take the chance of someone taking the name.
Yeah. So, I worked at the Caterie, the original Caterie.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Was that in the Cadian Village shop?
Yeah. It was a great time. And I had Brian Brusso on the podcast, and he got more likes and shares and comments than anybody. He came in with a wife beater T-shirt on.
No way.
Yeah. And he's just an absolute character. He's extremely successful at what he does now. But
I don't know him. I need to look him up. Go talk to him.
Yeah, he's a great guy. He's a great, great guy.
And who did they sell to? Do you recall?
3 guys that tried to make a run of it. And, they had music there, and it was a great scene.
Yeah.
Great. But it was a big family. The Brussos, a big family.
Okay.
And so a lot of their friends of all the kids would come, and so they were pretty successful early on. But it was a great entrepreneurial story, really, really a great story. And he did a fantastic job of telling the story. So the Caterie opened in late October?
Yes, late October.
Nice. You've got more to ReBirth Brands, right?
Yes.
What's your next project?
So we have purchased early 2022. We purchased K Street, or the furniture, fixture, and equipment in K Street, rather, not the name. I ran into Brad Watts, who, ironically, I'm a very big believer in divine intervention, and his first job was for my dad at Gus's on Highland, which I didn't know until recently, and he's I've known him forever, obviously, and we ran into each other one day at the foyer eating lunch, and I was meeting a buddy, and he was eating by himself, and I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm going to meet the landlord next for K Street. They want me to renew the lease, but, I don't really want to renew because I don't plan on being here for 5 years. My daughter's fixing to graduate high school and so on and so forth. And so I was like, well, good luck to you, and didn't think much of it, and then I just kind of sat on it for a couple of days over the weekend, and I was like, man, he's trying to, get out of everything, and I'm trying to get in more. And so let me just reach out to him and see if there's, any conversation to have, because he's got a couple other spaces too, the River Room downtown and Cecilia's, and he has partners in Cecilia, but not in K Street or the River Room. And so I just told him, say, hey man, I don't know how the meeting went, but I'd love to discuss, with you if you're really wanting to get out. I'd love to grow. And so we sat down, and within like a week we had a deal figured out. It was the quickest deal that has ever happened, and he was anxious to get it done because he wanted to be done with it. COVID was tough for him, and he wasn't one of the lucky ones, as I was talking about earlier. They didn't get some grant money, and so I think he was wore out. So he really made the deal seamless. He made the whole deal with the landlords for me, and we came to terms, and so he closed. His lease ended in February, so he closed then, and that was right before St. Patrick's Day, which I've said is our biggest day of the year. And so I was very upfront with the landlords that I can't even think about this until May at the earliest, because I've got to finish this, and then I got to come off of that and really decompress and kind of get my thoughts together on what this will be. But I definitely want it, and so we signed a lease and moved forward, and Brad and I made an agreement and sat on it, and now we've decided that we're going to open the Colonel's Club, which is a popular place back in originally the 50s, 60s.
So that was the original location of the Colonel's Club? That was
the original location, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And then another entity called the Old Colonel's Club opened in the 90s in that same space.
Oh, okay.
And there's so much history in with that space, and that's kind of what, ReBirth Brands is all about. Then I just kind of realized with Phil's and then Earl's, as I said earlier, is that there's so many local places that have been so beloved by so many people that have gone away for whatever reason. And so if we're able to bring that back in its original location or somewhere close, and really pay homage to what it was there before, that's what we want to do. And so we call it, spirited hospitality, because it's in our blood, and it's in my blood and the folks that work with us. And we're passionate about serving our people, serving our community, and taking care of our team. And we believe there's some memorable experiences we can create in these iconic places. And that building that we're taking over, the history that we've learned from the Oakwan family, whose grandfather, J.L. Shepard, was a pilot who actually taught Barry Seals how to fly.
Oh, come on.
You can't make it up. And you see photos, and there's the building that's there that the restaurant in was there before the interstate, I-10, before the Perkins overpass. And so there's pictures that he had of when it was just clear land, and he would fly his plane in there. And he always had a German Shepherd with him, dog, and then it was his hangar, and that's where he would service his planes. And then he also had started Baton Rouge Refrigeration, and it was housed out of there. And so it had multiple purposes over the years. And when he opened the Colonel's Club, I believe it was a restaurant and low, but the second floor was like a speakeasy where there was card games, illegal card games. And there's photos of all of it back in the day. And it was really, really cool. And that property is still in the same family. His grandchildren own it now, and it's just so awesome. So we hope to kind of really tell that story through what we're doing.
Wow, that is fantastic, man. So ReBirth Brands will be well on its way with Earl's, a Caterie, Colonel's Club.
That's right. And then also, there's Schlitts Giggles Pizza, which I used to work at. And when Jack and Brandon from the Walk-Ons split in 2014, Jack kept Brew House and Schlitts, and Brandon kept Happy's and Walk-Ons. And long story short, Jack and I have remained friends and stayed in touch. And he's not really interested in day-to-day operations. So in 2019, when my brother and I began to part ways, and I was doing Earl's, I started running Schlitts. And so Schlitts is currently under our management now, ReBirth, and so we manage that brand as well.
Oh, good for you.
It's been around 15 years, and so silly name, serious pizza is all we're about. So we really want to breathe some new, fresh life into that brand and try and maybe grow it as well, because we think it's an awesome brand.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So when you talk about building business, if you start from scratch, you're building your brand, you're building recognition, you're trying to get people in there. But with ReBirth, and that branding is already done, It reminds me of the Hawk's Nest. You know, the Hawk's Nest was iconic Baton Rouge bar and restaurant, and then they went a little bit on the downside, and then they were going to sell. So they had 10 days, the last 10 days, and you couldn't get in the place, right? But before that, you know, they weren't doing any business, but people couldn't get enough of it until they were going out of business.
Is it not crazy?
You know, it's that name recognition. And so if you do what you're doing and you get into a brand that has that name recognition, what a great way to grow a business. So congrats on that.
Thank you.
So you've really got it going on, you know, with all those different brands. That's really fascinating. I love it. When I read about it recently, I was really intrigued with it, and I said, I got to talk to Jordan. So congrats on that.
Thank
you. I wanted to talk a little bit about politics. You, in 2020, you ran for mayor of Baton Rouge.
I did.
Were you the youngest candidate ever, or?
I think I did some history. I don't think I was the youngest because I was predicting if I won, would I be the youngest? And there was one guy back early on that was a little younger. So, but I was definitely the second youngest for sure.
Yeah, so that's good. So how was that experience?
It was incredible. You know, full honesty, you can't go in expecting to win. So, being humble, right? Like I wanted to win. I was doing everything that I could to win, but the odds were against me, and I had to know that going in. And so with that approach, I think my wife and my family were more upset, and I'm like, hey, it's okay. This is the first run. Like, you don't always win the first one, but what I learned from it was just incredible. I mean, just how the city operates and the parish operates, and some of the backdoor things that you don't want to know about, or the people that benefit at the detriment of the city. I mean, there's a lot of eye-opening things that I learned. But I encourage, what most important, which I think it will hopefully achieve, is getting younger people involved. And I think it opened a lot of eyes. It's like, hey, some of these processes and systems are outdated, and we can't expect the older generation that don't understand how things work now in some regards to change that. So if we want that to change, we have to get involved. Yeah. And so I loved it. I thought it was awesome.
I remember one of your platforms being you wanted to find a way to keep young people in Baton Rouge.
That's right. I graduated with a class of 90 from U-High roughly, and I think 75% of them have left. Yeah. And truthfully speaking, there's been times when I've considered leaving, right? And because there's, just like every city, there's a lot of challenges we face, and we don't see great leadership trying to change that. And it's not that the mayor herself, I mean, she doesn't, look, she's just the face, right? There's a lot more behind the scenes. There's with any business, the CEO is the face, but there's a lot more behind it that works. But it was very evident that things aren't heading in the right direction. And I love the city. I grew up, I was like, how can anyone want to leave here? And then I'd start to see and look at the statistics that we have one of the highest budgets per capita in the nation, but one of the lowest use of dollar, basically, like how the dollar is spent. And it's like quality of life was very low too. And it's like, well, no wonder people are leaving. Like, they're giving more and getting less. Like, that doesn't work typically. Right. And so I've been, seen some of our friends come back, and I'm hoping more will come.
What are your hopes for Baton Rouge?
My hopes would be for this crime to slow down. I think Baton Rouge has a lot to offer. I think it's, Louisiana's a unique culture that is very, not found anywhere else in the world. And I think, we kind of take a little bit of different cultures from all over and we incorporate into one. And so any tourist that comes in loves Louisiana. So I think Baton Rouge has a lot to offer, but we can't just continue to thrive off of the success of LSU. We have to create our own identity. And so for Baton Rouge, I just want people to see what great resources we have here, how many major companies that are, billion-dollar businesses actually in Baton Rouge, which I think a lot of people are unaware of. So I just want us to celebrate the small things, right, and enjoy the natural resources we have, as opposed to just only looking forward to football season or basketball season and baseball and not anything else that the city has to offer, because there's so much more here.
Yeah, so you mentioned your first run was you can't expect to win that. Do you see an opportunity where you would consider running for mayor again?
Potentially. I mean, I think no time soon. I've got 2 young kids and one more on the way. So, family is all I'm focused on. And I know that job is going to require, mega attention. And I'm not ready to give that up yet. So, but, I'd love to be helping on the back, behind the scenes, however I can, and put the right person. I think Baton Rouge is, I'm a Republican, registered Republican, but Baton Rouge is obviously a Democratic parish overall. And so it's been a long time since a Republican. I think the last Republican was it Simpson? Was the last Republican in office. And so I think the odds are against a Republican. I'm optimistic that if St. George were to ever come to fruition, that it could lead, to the mayor in that area would definitely be a Republican in my mind, because it's predominantly Republican over there. But I think Republican in the city of Baton Rouge, or the parish of East Baton Rouge, is going to be a difficult feat.
Yeah.
And I saw recently, ironically, that the mayor of Dallas, an African American gentleman who's a Democrat, announced he just won his second reelection, and his last, that there's the top 10 metropolitan cities in the nation, they're all Democrat elect. And he came out recently and changed to be a Republican and said that there's a lot of issues with these big cities because they're ran by Democrats. And so I'm not saying Democrats are bad people, but I'm just saying I think it was intriguing to have a Democrat come out and say that. And so I think it's what Baton Rouge needs, though, is a different mindset, because they have different philosophies.
So you've talked about family a bit. How do you handle that work-life balance?
Oh, it's
being in the restaurant business.
Yeah, especially, it's challenging. I mean, again, I don't go to the bar often anymore. When it first opened, I was there all the time because I had to make sure it was successful. But when COVID happened and it shut down, it was turned everything off. So when it cranked back up, we did everything we could to have the right people in place to prevent us from having to be there. So we hired the right manager, so he would be the identity of the bar, not me. And obviously still be involved, and that's been successful. But now that I have little ones, it's challenging, because I want to get home early to see them, but there's work to be done, right? And mom's taking care of the kids, and we have 2 under 2, about to be 3 under 3, and so they're a little itty bitty, and so getting home to them is important to me. But at the same time, I got to make sure that the business is successful. It's a delicate balance.
And what is your long-term vision for ReBirth Brands?
Ideally, to continue to find and identify these brands in the community that are maybe gone or need to be repurposed, or people that have owned them for a while and looking to pass on and don't have families that want to have any interest in that, and continue that legacy and continue to add to them, or maybe grow some of these brands into multi-units.
Yeah, I was curious if you looked at the ReBirth Brands being one-off.
Yeah, I mean,
Earl's, Caterie.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it is right now. But I mean, with like Schlitts particularly, like we've thought about, looking into franchising that. I mean, pizza is the number 2 consumed food in the world, so it's obviously a hot market, but there's a lot of competition. Earl's, we've been approached in the past about other locations, but it's just about timing, not forcing anything on that. So we just kind of see how it plays out to see if any of these will have more than one location.
Good deal. Jordan, I enjoyed it very much, man. Great storytelling, and I appreciate you coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, sir. So good to talk with Jordan Piazza. The thing that I take away from our time together is the importance of family in his business and in his life, and how he tries to balance that. I loved how he shared the stories, legacy of his father, and how he wanted to reopen Phil's to honor that. Not quite satisfied maybe with how things ended up and with his father's business, but they got it back to life, and now he's got ReBirth Brands, and he's really got something to build on there, and he's got a lot in the pipeline. So I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. We appreciate you guys watching, and we'll catch you next time. We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. They can be found online at b1bank.com. The Next Entrepreneur is produced by Propel Productions. You can find more information at propelyourstory.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Next Entrepreneur podcast and hit the bell for notifications. You can also follow us on social media. The links are in the description below.